yadi saṁskṛta-utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī athāsaṁskṛta-utpādaḥ kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam.
Yadi saṁskṛta-utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī athāsaṁskṛta-utpādaḥ kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. MMK chapter 7 verse 1. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks. Whereas if going up is uncontrived, how is there a sign of contriving? So you can see there's a bit of a change of scenery this morning. Snow has stopped play in terms of making compost. So day without work, day without food principle will have to be honoured later on. I'll continue on plastering these walls that you can see I made a start on. But I'm sitting now in front of a fire, wearing the kesa which I usually wear of a morning, sewed end of the 1980s, so it's a little bit in ragged condition now, repaired many times. And what I'm going to do with this verse is say what I think it really means in practice, as far as I've been able to scratch the surface of the egg. And then we'll get into the weeds of what it means on the surface and how it's been interpreted, I would submit, not so deeply by attempts to translate it hitherto. So that'll get very technical and probably people's eyes will be glazing over by that time. So first of all, I'm going to begin by saying what I think it means on the basis of my actual practice for 30 odd years. So that we got in this verse the word saṁskṛta and athāsaṁskṛta, and those words for me have been absolutely fundamental in my explorations. This book was published in 1994, so 25 years ago, and slightly before that I wrote in my introduction notes on the translation, I called it, and there's a section in which I talked about Sanskrit terms. I spoke about the aim of the translation, the source text, and then I put Sanskrit terms. And in that section, even in translating Chinese terms whose Sanskrit derivation Master Dogen does not explicitly recognize, knowledge of the Sanskrit can still be very helpful. An early example is the adjective mui, that's in Chinese wu wei, used in the opening sentence of chapter 1, Bendoa, to describe zazen. So in that sentence translated at that time, when the Buddha Tathagatas, each having received the one-to-one transmission of the splendid Dharma, experience the supreme state of Bodhi, they possess a subtle method which is supreme, mujo, and without intention, mui. So I translated mui as without intention. So to continue the discussion in the notes on the translation, Japanese dictionaries define mui as idle or inactive, but Nishijima Roshi originally translated it as natural. In Buddhist sutras, mui represents the Sanskrit athāsaṁskṛta, which is defined in the Monier-Williams Sanskrit Dictionary as follows: not prepared, not consecrated, unadorned, unpolished, rude as speech. The Sanskrit dictionary definition, while by no means an absolute criterion, supports Nishijima Roshi's interpretation that Mui describes Zazen as natural or without intention, something as it is. So you could see 25 years ago, I'd recognised that this word athāsaṁskṛta was vital. And in the background, my reasoning had been, in my 20s, I was aware that Master Dogen came back from China to Japan when he was 27. And so he left his teacher behind at the age of 27 and already had understood enough that he could establish, he could regard himself as bringing back, so I use the word established, which is a blast from the past, because establish is a red flag in Nāgārjuna's lexicon. But Master Dogen thought at the age of 27 that he was introducing the true Dharma into Japan. So he had this real confidence. So when I was in my 20s, lacking that kind of confidence, I was trying to understand what had he understood that gave him that confidence, which was the confidence I wanted to have, but didn't have. And I somehow knew it must have to do with the true meaning of athāsaṁskṛta. He described Zazen as supreme, and I believe Zazen was supreme, and athāsaṁskṛta, which Nishijima Roshi had translated as natural. But and natural is a good translation. I still think natural is a good translation. At the same time, we've got Alexander's famous words that when an investigation comes to be made, it will be found that everything we're doing in the work is exactly the same as what happens in nature when the conditions are right. The difference being that we're learning to do it consciously. So that's the problem with natural. Mui has a negative. Mu means without. And then so what does E mean? Well, E means samskaras, actually. So it all boils down to understanding what samskaras are and how, in what sense are they stopped. The answer to those questions, Nāgārjuna took pains to provide. So that's what we're doing here. We're clarifying those answers. But that was the question I wanted to know. Assāṁskṛta. So later in that same year, in 1994, when I started reading about the Alexander technique and having Alexander lessons, and also started looking a little bit more into Tai Chi and Qigong and Wu Wei as explored in those Chinese arts, I was primed to really go for what Alexander had discovered about non-doing, because it was obvious to me that athāsaṁskṛta, the natural, meant free of doings. So in those 25 years since then, I started my Alexander teacher training in 95. I was back in England by the end of 94 visiting Alexander training courses. So in those 25 years, I've been deepening my understanding of what non-doing is. And in Alexander terms, 25 years is actually not very long, because to explore what non-doing is a big undertaking. So let's get back to this verse. What's described as saṁskṛta, which I just translated here as contrived. So as well as studying non-doing in Alexander work for 25 years and in Zazen, of course, I've also been studying for the last 10 or so years what Ashvaghosha and Nāgārjuna meant by their use of Sanskrit words like saṁskrita. In fact, the word Sanskrit represents saṁskrita, because saṁskrita means, insofar as it means polished, the Sanskrit language is a polished language, as opposed to the more colloquial Prakrit, which is before made, which is more sort of raw, colloquial language of ancient India. Sanskrit is the polished form of the language. So Sanskrit has that meaning. It means made together. Sam means together, so con in Latin, and krita means made. So confected is a very literal translation. You think etymologically. Sanskrita means confected. In the case of the Sanskrit language, there's no sense in which it's confected in a pejorative sense, but there is a sense it's worked, it's polished. But in a pejorative sense, Saṁskṛta means confected, manufactured, contrived. It means not natural in that sense. So Saṁskṛta means sort of not natural, and athāsaṁskṛta, the antonym, means, as Nishijima Roshi intuited, it means natural, but if we translate it with a negative, it means not contrived, uncontrived, not manufactured, not arranged, which is exactly a word that Nelly Ben-Or would use in Alexander work. You know, because you can if you misunderstand head forward and up, you try to do a little arrangement. You know, you try to arrange the head on top of the spine, and what you're doing in that is you're pulling the head back and down very minutely onto the spine. When you give up arranging, this is what happens to my voice when I haven't done a good hour's work, an honest hour's work, and had a shower. You see, for me, physical work is like medicine, and without it, I become like a hungry ghost with a scrawny neck that doesn't allow the air to pass through fully. Yadi saṁskṛta utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks. So this is what I'm talking about. My experience is that if I practice Zazen in the morning, give my Alexander directions, and then go into movement without a care in the world, just shovel that fucking compost. Forget about everything. That's when it comes out in the wash, in Marjorie's words. That's when going up is uncontrived. When I'm doing something I like, you know, with nobody to bother me, beautiful nature, work up a sweat. I usually wear, in the winter, I wear a good few layers. And so even if I'm not working that vigorously, I still work up a sweat and then have a shower, and I'm ready to use my voice better than I'm doing now, because it's you can hear it's a bit constricted. So what we want is utpādaḥ, going up. Pad, the verbal root of pad is literally means to fall down. So it's a bit ironic. Utpādaḥ means falling up, which again is another phrase that's used in Alexander work in the context of walking or running, where instead of trying to hold yourself in the right sort of position or posture, you fall forward, but it's not a forward and down, it's a falling forward and up. So you can practice that. Think of falling forward in walking or running, but don't let it be a contracting thing, let it be an expanding thing. So utpādaḥ literally means falling up, or etymologically ut, the prefix ut means up, and pad means fall or go. So utpādaḥ, I've translated it here as going up. If you look at previous translations, I think previous translators would be horrified by that translation of utpādaḥ, but never mind, we'll discuss that in the second half of this video. So yadi, if, going up, utpādaḥ, nominative singular masculine, saṁskṛta, contrived, so the visarga at the end is dropped. So yadi saṁskṛta utpādas. So utpādaḥ goes to utpādas before tatra. So yadi saṁskṛta utpādaḥ goes to yadi saṁskṛta utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī. if going up is contrived, tatra, to it, to that, so tatra is locative, to that, to it, yuktā, that's nominative, plural, feminine. And yuktā means joined or attached, harnessed. Tri-lakṣaṇī means 3 lakṣana. So lakṣana we had it in a couple of chapters ago. So we're now a discussion of space in chapter 5. We talked about the distinguishing marks or the defining marks of space, and in the course of that chapter we considered the hidden meaning of lakṣana means aiming to hit the mark. So the act of aiming is another alternative meaning of lakṣana. The act of aiming to hit the mark. So the word mark is useful in that sense because it suggests characteristic or sign, which is included in lakṣana. But aiming to hit the mark is also included in lakṣana. Or targeting is another way of put it in one word, targeting. So that introduces the whole question of end gaining or aiming towards a goal by indirect means. And then we have that memorable phrase, drashtavyopashamam shivam, drashtavyopashamam shivam, the happiness as the cessation of the to be seen or the to be realized. So it's the whole question of polishing a tile and making a mirror. The word lakṣana it's like, once we've understood that from chapter 5, Nāgārjuna sort of saying, now wake up, lakṣana, think again about what this means. So on the surface, tri-lakṣaṇā, well no, not on the surface, tri-lakṣaṇī is 3 defining marks. And those 3 defining marks are, as per the title, utpādaḥ, sthiti, bhanga. Utpādaḥ, going up or arising, or genesis, being born. Sthiti, staying still, or stasis, or duration. And bhanga means cessation, or breaking up, dissolution. So as we discussed yesterday in connection with the title, those 3 defining marks are people who like ontological discussion. No names mentioned. Discuss the 3 defining marks of a moment. So they think that a moment exists and it has its genesis, its very short stasis, and then its cessation. So those are the 3 defining marks. And what I've translated as going up in the first pada would more conventionally be translated as arising or genesis. We'll consider previous translations, but going up is what Ananda Jyoti Bhikkhu would describe as an idiosyncratic translation. But I think it's the other ones that are idiosyncratic, but I would say that attached to it, yuktā, tatra. Tatra to it, yuktā, attached, tri-lakṣaṇī. Now why that's feminine, I'm not sure, because lakṣana is usually nominative. So certainly if it means targeting, it's nominative neuter. Sorry, not nominative neuter. So lakṣana is originally a na action noun. So it means the act of aiming, the act of targeting, the act of characterizing, the act of defining. But here, lakṣaṇī is feminine, and it could be for metric reasons, because if it was nominative neuter plural, it would be tri-lakṣaṇāni, which would have an extra syllable. I don't know why it's feminine, but it is. So yuktā is nominative feminine plural. Yadi saṁskṛta utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks. Whereas uncontrived, athāsaṁskṛta, so plus athāsaṁskṛta, athāsaṁskṛta, utpādaḥ, going up, so athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, whereas if going up is uncontrived, how, kathaṁ, is there a sign of contriving? Saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. So saṁskṛta, here I've translated it as the gerund, contriving. So the verbal root is saṁskṛta, which means to make together, to confect, to compound, to accumulate in terms of karma. Saṁskṛta means to accumulate. We saw in chapter 26, verse 10, samsara mūlam saṁskṛaṇ avidvan saṁskṛot yada. The samskaras, which are the root of samsara, thus does the ignorant one saṁskṛta, thus does the ignorant one compound, confect, accumulate. But here we've got saṁskṛta, which in the first pada and the third pada is adjectival, contrived. The past participle, so used as an adjective, contrived. But the past participle can also mean ing. So krita can mean made, or it can mean making. So saṁskṛta can mean contrived, confected, compounded. It can also mean contriving. Saṁskṛta can mean contrived, it can mean contriving. So saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam, I've taken it to mean there is, so it's nominative singular neuter, so there is a sign, lakṣaṇam, of contriving. How is there a sign of contriving? So I've translated it in my idiosyncratic manner in such a way that it makes perfect sense for any Alexander people out there who read that verse. It immediately, intuitively resonates with their experience and their practice. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks. So those three defining marks are the defining marks of what is contrived. Okay, it starts, it has a duration, and it has an ending. Whereas the Buddha's teaching of pratitya samutpada, which is prapanchopashama, stopping of spinning things into self-existence, which is shivam, which is happiness or nirvana, that is uncontrived. It doesn't have the three defining marks of starting, lasting, and stopping. Hence it's called anirodham anutpadam, beyond cessation, beyond being born, beyond death, beyond birth. Anirodham anutpadam anuchedam ashashvatam. It's beyond eternity and beyond being cut. Because it's about happenings, not things like stones which have a beginning and an end. Anekartam, ananartam, beyond identity, beyond difference, because a happening is not separate from other happenings, so it can't be identified or differentiated from them. Anagamam, manirgamam, beyond coming, beyond the time that comes, beyond the time that goes, because a happening is not in time, it's not in time as we conceive it as having a start, middle, and an end. It's not of the now, which is discussed by people like Eckhart Tolle with their power of now. Okay, so that's why if going up is contrived, it has those three defining marks of genesis, stasis, and dissolution, so-called. But what we're exploring here, and through the whole of MMK, is what the Buddha taught. Ya pratitya samutpadam prapanchopashamam shivam deshayamasa sambuddhas tam vande vadatam varam. I bow to him, the fully awakened one, who taught dependent arising, the cessation of spin, happiness. So we're here to explore what the Buddha taught. And what the Buddha taught, the same as what Master Dogen taught, fundamentally, most fundamentally, was the supreme method, which is athāsaṁskṛta, not contrived. That supreme method is sitting in full lotus, just sitting. So, whereas if going up is uncontrived, athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, how is there a sign of contriving? Kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. Okay, so, I mean, I started looking at this verse yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, and it really kind of, it puts you in mind of that joke I mentioned yesterday. How do you make God laugh? You tell him your plans. When you really start exploring and digging below the surface of a verse like this, you just have to kind of say, you know, it's impossible to get to the bottom of, and that might be the whole point of it. Because the more you think about it, the more possibilities emerge. And that's why I think Nāgārjuna has used the word lakṣaṇam straight off here. Because if we've studied it in chapter 5, we're already alert to the possibilities it introduces. So, kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. The first way I've translated it, how is there a sign of contriving? So that's a rhetorical question, and the implication is there cannot be a sign of contriving. If we're going up, as in like the Holy Grail of Alexander work, you are just out of the way, and going up is doing itself, and the breathing's all free, the digestion's working well, you know, we're bright, enjoying life, harmoniously interacting with nature and with other people. So that's what we're aspiring to. Going up, being uncontrived. And the central experience of that is you sit in full lotus and you're one with nature. Gravity is your friend, it's helping you like wind in the sails. Go up like 1 o'clock. Whereas if going up is uncontrived, how is there a sign of contriving? So in that ideal situation, there's no sign of contrivance. The right thing's doing itself, and one is just out of the way. Okay, so that's one possibility. But another way of understanding it, because you see, it seems like a rhetorical question, but literally speaking, it's just a question. So it could be an open question, and an open question, more than a rhetorical question, kind of opens the ground for exploration. I was reflecting on that this morning. When I wake up in the morning, I always feel miserable because my life has basically been a failure. If you talk about, especially in my relations with other people, I mean, my own explorations have carried on. So I think my understanding on some level has continued to deepen. But when it comes to my efforts to help others or to to make much difference, I feel like my life has been a failure compared with how it might have been when I was in my 20s during the 1980s. And for whatever reason, the truth is, I wake up in the morning and really feel I've been a failure. So I think again, what has it been all about? The Shobogenzo translation. Has any good come of it? Did it do any good? And you know, I see nowadays people using other translations. They prefer, like Sansui Gyoe Okumura has done his book on the Mountains and Rivers Sutra, and it seems he used Carl Bielefeld's translation, which admittedly was a very good one. But you know, you see things like, well, what was the point? You know, we really thought we were providing something that was going to be useful for Zen practitioners, and now people are using these other ones, you know. And what causes me to sort of transcend that kind of negative thinking is, well, even if our translations aren't revered as the best ones, we opened up the ground. We opened up the ground for others to explore. And I strongly suspect that translations that came after ours would have relied pretty heavily on the donkey work that I did, for example, in chapter 17, Hokke Ten Hokke. I spent the whole of one summer basically going through reading the Lotus Sutra in Chinese characters and locating the references that Master Dogen picked up in Shobogenzo, building on the work that Nishijima Sensei had already done in his translation of Shobogenzo into modern Japanese. So I wouldn't say that between the two of us, we opened up the ground for people to explore that chapter. And probably the same thing will happen here. Some bright spark will probably come along and do a translation of this verse, which is appreciated more than my idiosyncratic version. But I do sense that I'm opening up the ground, because when I look at the other translations that I'm going to explore in a minute, I think they missed Nāgārjuna's point, at least the deeper point. Yadi saṁskṛta utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks: athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. Whereas if going up is uncontrived, how is there targeting of contrivance? See, that's another way. Kathaṁ, how? Lakṣaṇam, targeting. Saṁskṛta, contriving, contrivance. How is there targeting of contrivance? If going up is uncontrived, how is there targeting of contrivance? Well, that's precisely what happens in an Alexander lesson, actually. Because the teacher is going up, or at least that's what should be happening, is the teacher's going up, and in that going up of the teacher, there is targeting of the contrivance, especially of the pupil. So work it out for yourself. But that's another thing to be explored. It's an open question. How is there targeting of contrivance? Athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. There's a robin bouncing around in the snow there. Whereas if going up is uncontrived, how is contriving relevant? So that's another meaning of lakṣana. According to the Sanskrit English Dictionary, the act of aiming at, aim, goal, scope, object. So in the sense that lakṣana means scope, it's sort of like an area circumscribed by something. So at the end of a compound, as here, it says IFC, infinito compound. What's compound in Latin? I don't know, but IFC means at the end of a compound. At the end of a compound, it equals concerning, relating to, coming within the scope of. So in that sense, kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam means how is it in the scope of contriving? How has contriving got anything to do with it? Okay, so when you're going up, when you're really going up, who's worried about the meaning of saṁskṛta or about whether it's contrived or not contrived? When I'm happily shoveling compost, the meaning of doing or non-doing or saṁskṛta, athāsaṁskṛta doesn't come into it. Is he suggesting that? I don't know, he might be. But the point is, these are things to be explored. And finality is not in sight. That's a phrase of Patrick MacDonald in his book, The Alexander Technique, as I see it. He said, for me, finality is not in sight. And later on in this chapter, we have the word anavastita, if I can find it. So I didn't know how far to look actually, it was in verse 3. And the word is anavastita, and it's usually translated to mean an infinite regression. You know, in philosophy, if A contains A, which contains A, which contains A, it's like a hall of mirrors that just goes on and on, so an infinite regression. But the original word means not avastitaha, not stable. So it means unsettled or unstable as an adjective. Anavasta as an adjective means unsettled or unstable. As a noun, anavasta, feminine, means unsettled condition, instability. Okay, but in philosophy, anavasta expresses non-finality of a proposition, an endless series of statements. Hence, David Kalupanahan, followed by Garfield and Sideris and Katsura, all translate as infinite regress. So it's something in philosophy, they think, anavastita. But that's the ostensible meaning in philosophy. But the real meaning, I think, is non-finality, like Patrick MacDonald was talking about. And exploration has to do with non-finality, doesn't it? Pariksha, looking into things, looking deeply into something. When you look deeply into something, the point is to look deeper and deeper. It isn't necessarily to see the bottom of it, get to the end of it. So we'll consider that further in verse 3. But for the moment, that's my effort to scratch the surface of the egg with 3 translations of kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. How is there a sign of contriving? If going up is uncontrived, how is there a sign of contriving? If going up is uncontrived, how is there targeting of contrivance? If going up is uncontrived, how is contriving relevant? Right, I'm going to put another log on the fire, refill my coffee cup, and now get into the weeds of previous translations. Okay, so first we have the translation by Kenneth K. Inada, translated way back in 1970. And Inada's title, translation of the chapter title, Saṁskṛta Pariksha, in the unamended text, examination of the created realm of existence. So saṁskṛta, what's created. So he's translated saṁskṛta as the created realm of existence. So the realm of existence should really be in square brackets. Saṁskṛta does mean created, but it doesn't really mean realm of existence. So here's his translation of the first verse. if yadi, origination, utpādaḥ, is of the created nature, saṁskṛta, then the three characteristics, i.e. origination, duration, cessation, that's tri-lakṣaṇī, will prevail, yuktā. Okay, so the will is a little bit of poetic license because there's no future originally. But if origination, utpādaḥ, is of the uncreated nature, athāsaṁskṛta, how could it be kathaṁ, a characteristic of the created, saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam? If origination is of the created nature, then the three characteristics, i.e. origination, duration, cessation, will prevail. But if origination is of the uncreated nature, how could it be a characteristic of the created? So it's fairly literal. Let's have a look at, so very, very literal, but it doesn't really speak to me of anything very interesting when you compare the really practical meaning of saṁskṛta and athāsaṁskṛta. Let's see how David J. Kalupahana adds to the discussion. His book was published in, what was the first edition? First Indian edition, 1990. Can't see without my glasses. 1986, is it? Yeah, 1986. Copyright 1986, State University of New York. So after 16 years after Inada came Kalupahana, who's steeped a lot in the Pali Sutras. So I've got some interesting. I found his book, going through his book, very useful for going back to see where the antecedents were in the Pali Sutras of a lot of things. But here's Kalupahana's translation from the Sanskrit. Again, the chapter title for Kalupahana is Saṁskṛta-pariksha, and he translates it, the examination of the conditioned, but he has an explanation in which he explains how he thinks samskaras means disposition, what he calls dispositions. So I'll read that commentary out after the translation, which is, if yadi arising, utpādaḥ, is conditioned, saṁskṛta, therein, tatra, three characteristics, tri-lakṣaṇī, are proper. That's literal, another literal meaning of yuktā is proper, appropriate. If arising is conditioned, therein three characteristics are proper. If arising is unconditioned, athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, how can there be characteristics of the conditioned? Kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. So again, not much difference in terms of the ostensible meaning, but he does raise the question of how to translate saṁskṛta, and so this is his commentary. The examination of the conditioned, saṁskṛta, coming immediately after the analysis of lust, raga, and the lustful one, rakta, brings out another important aspect of the Buddha's conception of the pragmatic meaning of truth, a conception that Nāgārjuna seems to be clearly aware of. Lust, as pointed out earlier, is one of the most important elements in the Buddha's analysis of experience. It's quite ironic, isn't it? Because Kalupahana is quite strong on understanding that Nāgārjuna is criticising what Kalupahana calls the substantialist view of reality, or the essentialist view of reality. But when he talks about the Buddha's analysis of experience, that's the trap he's falling into himself, because the Buddha wasn't interested in an analysis of experience. Analysis of experience is prapancha. The whole point of the Buddha's teaching was to stop that kind of analysis and bloody get on with practice and experience. Kalupahana continues, lust is operative in the perpetual process, in the perceptual process, especially in the formation of ideas derived from experience. So this is very sort of very much in the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition. You sit there being mindful and you analyse every little thing that's going on, you know, not understanding. So that when the Buddha spoke of the 5 skandhas, those 5 skandhas were not put forward as a chance to analyse everything. It's like in chapter 26, Pancha Skandha Sacha Bhavaha, the 5 skandhas are becoming itself. It's like in Soundarananda, Nanda says to the Buddha, when Nanda's enlightened, he says, I see those 5 skandhas as pernicious concepts. Pernicious, the 5 skandhas are. Because Kalupahana comes from that tradition, he's expressing that bias here, you see. Lust is operative in the perceptual process, especially in the formation of ideas derived from experience. Having rejected omniscience, sarva jnatva, as a source of knowledge, the Buddha depended primarily on sense experience. Did he hell? He depended primarily on practicing zazen. However, for him, sense experience was a big, blooming, buzzing confusion. One way of dealing with this confusing mass of sense data is by concentrating, again it's the analysis, concentration. Compare Alexander. Beware the devil, that is concentration. By concentrating upon items that are of interest to the individual and then forming ideas, such selection is generally based upon one's interest. This is the significance of dispositions, brackets, samskara, equals compounding of ideas. So that's how he's understood samskara. So compounding is good for samskara, but compounding of what? He's saying it's samskara is the compounding of ideas. For the Buddha, one's conception of truth is invariably bound up with such dispositions. Therefore, all ideas are dispositionally conditioned, brackets, saṁskrita. So he's using this word condition. So saṁskrita doesn't mean conditioned. It doesn't mean conditioned. But for some reason that the word has gained popularity. The Buddha's final statement before his death, dispositions are subject to change, vaya dhamma saṅkhara, D2156, that would be Digha Nikaya, the long discourse is 2.156. Therefore, is an assertion that since ideas are impermanent, there can be no absolute truth. So, vaya dhamma saṅkhara. So, the Buddha's final statement before his death, according to Digha Nikaya. I was mentioning that yesterday. So, vaya dhamma, dhamma means the essence, or by essence or nature. And vaya means passing. So, vaya dhamma means transitory, having a nature to pass. Saṅkhara is plural, In Sanskrit, it will be saṁskṛta. So, you see, Kalapana's, again, he's a little bit of a groundbreaker there. That opens something up for me. The Vaya Dhamma Sankara. Samskaras, confections, constructions, contrivances, contrivings are subject to change. They're transitory. Have to think about how to translate that. You see, dharmas are empty. They're not subject to change. They're empty happenings. So what's different from empty happenings is things that we contrive. So insofar as this table is an empty happening, it's not subject to passing. It's not transitory. It's not impermanent. It's not full of suffering. Insofar as it's something like a kiss, a happening, it's full of suffering and impermanent, and it's vaya dhamma. Its nature is transitory. Its nature is to pass. Insofar as we contrive it as a thing like a stone, that's the point. So when Kalpahana says that dispositions are subject to change, he's making it more mental than it is. You know, does he understand that rupa means this bloody physicality? This physicality. It's not just a disposition. It's not, the table is not a figment of my imagination. It's not a compounding of my ideas. It's got physicality. So, sorry, David. I'm going to close you and move on to J. Garfield, who translated. I think he was building on Kalupahana, but nominally he translated it from the Tibetan. I mentioned Jan Westhoff a couple of days ago, and when I read his translation of Vigraha Vyavardhani Vritti, I must say I wanted to, you know, when somebody's already done the donkey work, it's not always clear whether a person's really translated the text for themselves or whether they've just done a bit of a little rewrite based on their own take on it. So to how deeply J. Garfield is steeped in study of Tibetan, I don't know, but he's certainly steeped in philosophical ideas, and especially about ontology. So here's his translation from the Tibetan, purportedly. If arising were produced, then it would also have the three characteristics. If arising is not produced, how could the characteristics of the produced exist? And so for produced, which is his rendering of saṁskṛta, well, it's not, it's his rendering of the Tibetan dubyed, and he's got a footnote. The term is sometimes appropriately translated as disposition, action, or compounded. Context is crucial in determining which rendering is best. In Buddhist metaphysics, these meanings are closely connected. Kalupahana, 1986, uses conditioned, though he interprets this to mean conditioned by dispositions. He argues that this chapter is closely connected to the previous chapter in that lust is operative in the perceptual process, especially in the formation of ideas derived from experience. He argues that this chapter is devoted to an examination of the way phenomena such as desire determine the formation of ideas from the blooming, buzzing confusion of sense experience. I find this reading unsupported by the text. Well, I would agree with you there, Jay, but let's see what you come up with. Here we are, here's his commentary. Having begun the text with an examination of the relation of dependency between phenomena, and having then conducted an analysis of the fundamental ontological constituents of reality, Nāgārjuna now brings these two analyses together in a long chapter investigating the nature of the world of conditioned things as a whole. The target position is the view that dependent arising itself, as well as dependently arisen things, are either inherently existent or completely non-existent. There are really two positions here with which Nāgārjuna must contend. First, the reificationist opponent charges that even if we grant Nāgārjuna's earlier arguments for the conclusion that phenomena themselves are empty because they are dependently arisen, dependent arising itself must inherently exist. For only if phenomena are truly dependently arisen, one might argue, are they truly empty. Second, Nāgārjuna must answer the following objection. If dependent arising is empty, then arising, stasis and cessation are non-existent. Hence there are in fact no phenomena, since phenomena are defined, particularly in a Buddhist context, as those things that arise, remain and cease. But clearly there are actual empirical phenomena. Indeed, such phenomena must exist for Nāgārjuna's claim that they are empty to make any sense at all. How can this be reconciled with the emptiness of dependent arising? So, I mean, it's very wordy, but the merit in that is where he says what's being targeted is the view that there are either inherently existent or completely non-existent. So those indeed are the two views that the Buddha negated, that things are inherently existent or completely non-existent. But so that's ontological. So J. Garfield basically is on safe ground when he's discussing ontology, which he likes to do. So, but he says that having conducted an analysis of the fundamental ontological constituents of reality. See, that's where J. Garfield wants. That's the basis on which he wants to discuss Nāgārjuna's philosophy. But Nāgārjuna never analyses the fundamental ontological constituents of reality. That's the Zen realist opponent does that. According to Nāgārjuna, there are no fundamental ontological constituents of reality. That's the whole point. Nāgārjuna's teaching is that reality is empty. What's dependently arisen is empty. What's dependently arisen is not a fundamental ontological constituent of reality. So to me, Garfield's obviously a very clever bloke, and but his translation from the Tibetan is Chinese whispers, and you just get the sense this is not a guy you could ever imagine sitting next to you for any length of time on a Zazen dojo. He's happier sitting around a table bullshitting. So finally we come to the translation by Siddhari Katsura of 2013, which I've got on my Kindle here. And their chapter title is An Analysis of the Conditioned, but then they add a footnote, if I can find it. We follow our usual practice of giving the chapter the title found in the LVP, Louis Vallée de Poisson edition of Prasanapada, here found also in the utpādaḥ. So these are two famous Sanskrit commentaries on MMK, which I haven't bothered to study. I'd rather just limit myself to what Nāgārjuna actually wrote. Although by studying those, scholars have actually helped clarify the original text. But Shaoyang Ye 2011 corrects this to an analysis of origination, duration and cessation, the title given also by Buddha Palita and the Bhaviveka. And here is their intro to the chapter. All dharmas are said to be conditioned. Now that's a very stupid thing to say in the first place. The point is that samskaras are contrived. Dharmas are empty. Dharmas are empty of themselves. So all dharmas are said to be pratitya samutpada, dependently arisen. But that isn't what saṁskṛta means. So that's confusing to start off with. All dharmas are said to be conditioned. That is, dependent for their existence on factors other than themselves. So they're really making a mess, muddying the waters by saying that. All dharmas are empty, in other words, dependently arisen. Therefore, they're not saṁskṛta. They're not contrived. What's contrived is samskaras, not dharmas. As such, they are characterized by origination, duration, and cessation. All dharmas are said to be conditioned, that is, dependent for their existence on factors other than themselves. As such, they are characterized by origination, duration, and cessation. No, that is wrong. All samskaras are said to be contrived, confected. That is, dependent for their existence on people like you spinning things into self-existence that don't actually exist. As such, they are characterized by origination, duration, and cessation. Moreover, their being conditioned is said to itself be an observable phenomena, and as such, to also be conditioned. It was disputed among Abhidharmikas how to interpret this, but some took it to mean that for each conditioned dharma, there are three more dharmas representing the conditioned dharmas, origination, duration, and cessation. The question then arose whether for each of those dharmas there are three additional dharmas. This is the question with which Nāgārjuna will begin his examination. But this leads to the larger question of how we should take the claim that existing things are subject to dependent origination. Well, existing things aren't subject to dependent origination. Empty dharmas are subject to dependent origination. So the waters that you've already muddied, you are continuing to muddy further. Since the doctrine of dependent origination is central to the Buddha's teachings, it might seem problematic for a Buddhist to maintain anything that calls into question the reality of dependent arising. And so here's the actual translation of verse 1. If yadi, origination, utpādaḥ, is conditioned, saṁskṛta, then the three characteristics, then is not there originally, the three characteristics tri-lakṣaṇī of square brackets of origination, duration, and cessation square brackets apply to it. Tatra yuktā. So, to be fair, Siddharisa and Katara's translation is usually reproduces the Sanskrit fairly faithfully. So you can usually see exactly which word in English corresponds to which word in Sanskrit. And then, but if atā, origination, utpādaḥ, is not conditioned, athāsaṁskṛta, how can it be a characteristic of the conditioned? Kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. So, again, translating Saṁskṛta as conditioned, to me, I don't understand how that convention has come about. Even Anandajoti Bhikkhu uses it. I think Siddharisa and Katara in their introduction there have clearly demonstrated how it actually is not useful. It muddies the waters. Here's their comment on the first verse. Suppose that origination is something that is conditioned. If everything conditioned is characterized by the three characteristics, then origination must itself be subject to origination, duration, and cessation. According to the Akṭobhaya, this must be rejected, since it leads to an infinite regress. This is the anavastita that we'll come to in verse 3. And I'm going to suggest that below the surface, anavastita doesn't mean an infinite regress in philosophy. It means a lack of finality in practice. The origination of origination will likewise be subject to its own origination, duration, and succession, and so on. Chandrakirti thinks the problem is instead that what is supposed to be a characteristic of dharmas becomes itself another dharma, that is among the things to be characterized by the characteristics of origination, and so on. And how can a characteristic characterize itself? Yadi saṁskṛta utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam. If going up is contrived, attached to it are three defining marks. Whereas if going up is uncontrived, how is there a sign of contriving? Below the surface, he's pointing in the first verse, he's giving us a clue that what he's really interested in is not the kind of ontological discussion that J. Garfield would like to have. He's talking about going up. He's talking about sitting in full lotus. And avidyayam nirudayam saṁskṛta asambhavaha. Where ignorance is being stopped, there is a non-coming into being of samskaras. That's when athāsaṁskṛta utpādaḥ, going up, is uncontrived. Where ignorance is being stopped. Avidyaya nirodastu jnanasyasya bhavanat. But the stopping of ignorance is because of understanding of just this. And just this might be saṁskṛtaṇam asambhavaha, the non-coming into being of samskaras. So what are samskaras? Contrivances. confections, constructs. For example, if I pull my chin in to keep my neck bone straight vertically, that's a physical samskara. Its result is right posture as a samskara, as a contrivance, as a confection. Not going up that's uncontrived, but a posture that's contrived, that's confected, that's arranged, in Nelly Benor's words. When we look for the root of that problem, the root is in the mental samskara, the conception of right posture is a samskara, a contrivance, a confection, a construct. That's why the Buddha said that samskaras are, he said something to the effect that samskaras are just volitions. So this contrivance of a right posture is really just the manifestation of a samskara confected with the mind. That's what Kalapahana was getting at in a not very clear way. Samskaras are done with body, mouth and mind. Trida, the three ways. That's the beginning of chapter 26. Punarbhavaya samskaran, the samskaras that lead to further becoming. Avidya nivrita trida, the one enveloped in ignorance, the one covered in ignorance. Avidya nivrita trida, in three ways. Athāsaṁskṛta yamstair, athāsaṁskṛta. So that's samskri, the verbal root samskri, with a further prefix abi. So athāsaṁskṛta, that suggests accumulates. Trida in three ways, that's with body, speech and mind. Athāsaṁskṛta yamstair, gatim gacchati karmabhihi. And by these actions, by these karmas, that's by doing it with body, speech and mind, gatim gacchati karmabhihi. By these actions, he goes to a gatim. So gacchati and gatim are both from the root gam, to go. So he goes to a course of going, a way of going. He goes to a realm, one of the realms in samsara. Hell, animals, hungry ghosts, angry asuras, human beings and gods. So it's by doing those three samskaras in our ignorance that we go, for example, to hell. And the way out of that is avidyaya nirodhastu jnanasyaiva bhavanat, through the cultivation of understanding what this really means, and what this could refer to the whole of the dependent arising of suffering described in chapter 26. It could be the whole of MMK, asya, jnanasyaiva, just this, but most immediately in that context it could be avidyayam nirudayam samskaranama sambhavaha. Where ignorance is being stopped, that should be on this zafu. Samskaranama sambhavaha. There is no coming into being. There is a non-coming into being. So it's like that. It's not there is no coming into being. It's there is a non-coming into being of samskaras. So to me it suggests there's a happening. There is a happening, which is a non-coming into being of samskaras. Finality is not in sight, but if you've managed to get to the end of this very long-winded exploration of 7.1, hope I might have helped open something up for somebody.
yadi saṁskṛta-utpādas tatra yuktā tri-lakṣaṇī athāsaṁskṛta-utpādaḥ kathaṁ saṁskṛta-lakṣaṇam.